What is up, everyone? This is your host, Eric Holtzman, and I want to welcome you to the Mindful Motion podcast. What is up, everybody? I hope you're having an amazing day. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Brandon Davis. Brandon is an exercise pro, entrepreneur, and a muscle system specialist. He is also a husband and a brand new father to a beautiful, healthy boy. Brandon is the founder and the owner of Neuro, a high-end exercise studio in Austin, Texas. And in my opinion, Brandon is a brilliant muscle system practitioner and exercise professional. He helps guide people in restoring their neuromuscular function and health so that they can live their highest quality life. So, first off, how's it being a new father, Brandon?
Man, it's wild. Every day I see him, like, is this real? But it's been super motivating. I think it's really anchored me in to know what matters and what I'm here for, and just I think the motivation alone is something that's amazing. But I feel like I was meant to be a father, and we're just really enjoying it. And time is moving fast. He's 5 months old today, so I'm just making sure to cherish every moment and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, it's a big shift in lifestyle. I mean, you just have to rethink everything once you have a little one, for sure. No more, late night partying and like sleeping sort of takes a back seat sometimes. Um, Before we jump into some of the nitty gritty stuff, I'd love to have you just kind of share with people how you got in, to the exercise industry, what led you down this path.
Yeah, man. So really, my journey started as an athlete, and fortunate or unfortunately, I had some pretty serious injuries at a young age. I fractured my spine in ninth grade, kind of a freak accident. I was invited to a college camp, and a linebacker there was acting like he was going to tackle me, and was going to stop and didn't, and just nailed me. And it was like a prestigious thing to be invited to, so I wanted to honor that and not say, hey, this guy hurt me. So I kind of just walked it off, and then I knew something was wrong. And the guys in my family are athletes, and we just tough it out. And so I played that season, which I got moved up to varsity at the end of the season, which was really awesome. Unfortunately, I had fractured my L5 vertebrae, and I kept playing. And when I told my coaches I just wanted to play baseball, they pretty much said, if you don't play football, you're not playing baseball. And verbatim, like, do you want to be a punk or do you want to be a star? So I wanted to be a star, and I had a lot of potential. But on top of that, I got way too strong for my system to tolerate, knowing what I know now. And it just led to so many imbalances and compensations, further injuries. By the time I went to college, which I still had a lot of opportunity to play sports, my shoulder, I tore my rotator cuff, I had neck issues, I had really messed up my pelvis from that. And so, also being a meathead, loving the physical aspect of lifting and moving, it's a big part of my life. I started looking for answers. Like, I know that I'm not getting the right stimulus. I know that I can heal. And, I guess the intensity of my injuries led me into some pretty, different fields. I started working with a physical therapist, and I didn't really get much of a result. Started seeing a certain chiropractor where I would get, okay results. And then on my path, long story short, I found somebody that did clinical kinesiology and chiropractic, and they pointed me to an MAT specialist. And then the rest is history. And that was, 2011, 2012. And then I just have been on this path since. So I just started with posture restoration and postural therapy, became a strength coach, was working with athletes. And then just from there, went down the MAT rabbit hole, took RTS 123, and then was fortunately introduced to Greg Mack, and I've just been blown away by the adjunct of really what it is, like, and what is exercise specifically on the table, and then just all of the options for somebody like you or myself that we can do. And I just don't think there's anybody doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that story really resonates with me because that's very similar to what happened in my life. I played football, had a neck injury, ended my career, and needed to figure it out for myself. And so I think that's a lot of times what happens when people get into these more nuanced, more holistic approaches. Before we continue, is there any way you can bring the mic closer?
Yeah.
To
How's that right there?
Yeah, it's perfect. It was just kind of going in and out a little bit.
Okay.
So you also did recently a seminar in South America. I was just curious, what was that like, and what were you talking about?
Yeah, man. So I was invited to speak on the physical body and just dialing in the pillars of health. So I spoke on movement, nutrition, and sleep. And one of my clients he's a high level psychologist and hypnotherapist. He's a very well known guy. I met him at a health event about a year ago. He used to be a dancer and had a ton of injuries, was in some pretty bad pain. And over the course of a year, we alleviated his pain. And so, I mean, he was like level 8, 9, and now he's like a 1 or 2 if it ever flares up. And so, as impressed as he was with me, he invited me, and it made me nervous speaking in front of 400 people. And so, I immediately accepted it. And yeah, we just jammed out on here's how to dial yourself in, and here's what you're missing from my vantage point. And here really just how we develop rituals for movement, for eating, to feel better, to empower ourselves, how to optimize recovery and sleep. And it was really cool. I spoke for 90 minutes and had about 20 or 30 people come up to me afterward.
Yeah, that's an amazing turnout, and that's a lot of people if you're not
It's a
used
lot
to
of people.
public speaking. Um, I wanted to backtrack. Actually, you mentioned something when you said when you were playing football, you were too strong for what your body could tolerate. Can you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah, so the force that I could produce was pretty freaky. I was lifting, for an example. I was in a weight rack with a guy named Davion who was about 85, 90 pounds heavier than I was, and I was doing all of his weight. And I mean, that's a big difference. I weighed at that time, maybe 175 pounds. He was probably 250. And just my ability to produce strength and force and torque and speed. But what I would notice is that after these intense lifts or playing, it's like my system would just be shot, and then being young and having a nervous system that at least somewhat manages it on the back end. I just did that. And I did not realize that I was putting myself in a hole. Like, why, when I am lifting this way, does my system just shut down? And I think it all just started stemming from that back injury. I had a pretty big imbalance and just learning about asymmetries in the body and just how the human is supposed to function. Like I was digging myself a hole, and it's no wonder that I tore my pelvis after that.
Yeah, that's it kind of comes with the territory when you play football because it's not really about health, you just gotta do as
Win.
much as possible. Yeah, exactly. It's a war on the field and whatever it takes sort of thing, even when you're training, comes with its own detrimental side effects in the long run. But thankfully, you found a resolution, at least to manage the damage you did and kind of restore yourself. So that's sort of why we're doing this, right?
So
Um,
weird. Yeah.
so I guess I would like to, touch base on a post you did on Instagram where you were talking about diaphragmatic breathing and breathing symmetrically. Can you maybe explain what you mean by symmetrical breathing?
Yeah. So what I was really referring to is understanding our infrasternal angle and what that looks like with where our rib cage is oriented. And so you and I are looking from certain areas. We're looking at range of motion, looking at somebody's posture. Where is their weight? Appropriating based on essentially what their brain is asking of them. And what I meant by symmetrical breath is that if someone's infrasternal angle of the rib cage is going out, and this is a hypothesis I was testing, is that they are using essentially an inhalation strategy for stability with their diaphragm. And the opposite side, if it's narrow, it means that they are using some sort of exhalation strategy that they're not necessarily aware of. It's just happening. And so within myself, with the injuries I had, I tore my pelvis and had a lot of trouble breathing properly after that, especially when I would exert force. I went through some courses and learned about that. And being able to load your tissues using your limbs, using your spine, so you can essentially oppose force while breathing. So it's almost like the test that we're doing on the table. We're checking it in abduction and the hip, but it's just being able to load in different positions. So if somebody is down here, and let's just say that they're laterally flexed and the rib cage is there, I test this hypothesis. So I'll do a test, see what happens when they breathe in. Do they get stronger or weaker? See what happens when they breathe out. Do they get stronger or weaker? And then pair exercise around that. And the human is meant to overall have pretty close symmetry side to side. We feel the best when we do. Obviously, we have organs and there's certain movement patterns that people have. But when you bring that about, especially utilizing breath, we come back online really quick.
Okay, so that's why in the video that you made, you had some opposite movements of the arms going on to try to accommodate a maybe a better, more symmetrical breathing pattern based on whatever that client's position is.
Yeah,
at the
based on whatever
time.
their position is, and if their rib cage is down on one side, strategies that open it up versus the other side, and then being able to test muscles after the fact. That's what's really cool about what we do, is putting it to the test. Like, I
Mhm.
see this is going on. You're weak in these positions, and it's matching up. And if it isn't, we can also understand why. But I think loading the tissues, and especially some of the video that I showed, it's me protracting and being able to breathe into my posterior system, right? Being able to breathe into the back where that bucket handle for our diaphragm when we breathe in, so our ribs can actually go up and out. And I mean, in minutes, the joints start to move. The muscles start to move the joints in a better position. They start moving better. I immediately started feeling better. So anytime my back is super tight, or if I have any area that's shutting down, it's just a way that I start. So I really optimize my breathing and then walking, and I go from there.
Yeah, that's interesting because like even this morning I was doing Wim Hof and I always pick up like subtleties and how my spine and rib cage is moving different each breath. Sometimes one side is a little more than the other to coordinate both evenly to get the same expansion. It doesn't always happen. It might take a little focus to do that or strategies like you're mentioning because it is something we do like 20,000 times a day. So it might be an important piece if you're dealing with back pain or some neck thing, or maybe,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah. And
know,
think about how our skeleton, our axial and our, whatever, our appendicular skeleton are stacked on each other. I think breath is such an easy way in to open up the diaphragm, get your respiratory muscles working, which are really just essentially these massive postural muscles that put us in a better position.
yeah,
Yeah, man, we'll have to talk. I'll have to send you some of the ones that I do.
yeah, for sure. I'd be interested to try some. I'm always looking for new things. You know, as you're talking about this, it makes me think about something else you'd mentioned. When we're trying to make changes in how we function, it's almost like a negotiation with our nervous system. I mean, what exactly do you mean by like negotiation?
Well, it's like our nervous system, it's the link between the brain and the body, right? And I think it's always trying to preserve itself. And so I think this is where wherever you are, assessing your capabilities and leaning into those. And when you do, your system starts to change. And so I think about it as movement first, then the mind. Movement first, then the brain. Get the skeletal muscle organ system talking the way that it should, and you are deliberately working in and out of positions to gain stability, to gain control, and to get multiple systems online, so you can have function dictated by all of that.
I got you. Yeah, so it's giving the right set like signals so that you can start to work. Like when you say lean into the things you're capable of versus what you can do, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, what are your capabilities of whatever it is you're trying to do? So I guess if I want to, let's think about an example. If I want to rotate my spine and I'm stuck, what I might do is find out, like, what is it? Is it my spine? Is it my shoulder? Is there a theme directionally of my entire body that doesn't want to go a certain way? And then finding ways to work into that and feeling all of those points and creating tension through that entire movement progression and then working out of it. So it's almost like we're going through the synergy and then, isolating in real time each point and working out of it, working the opposite side. I guess there's some level of understanding of how our mechanics move, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's as first and foremost assessing your capabilities through range of motion
Okay.
and
Active range of motion.
active range of motion, exactly. And then, understanding what sensations you have. And I think there's some psychology behind what we're feeling and our identity of ourself when we're moving. If I have an idea for me, that my back, I have this whole story of these injuries kept me from doing this, and anytime I load it a certain way I break down and I feel a certain way cognitively and whatever. It's just letting go of that and working in and out of positions that I might not have stability or strength or control in, and adapting to those positions and spending time there and telling my system and my brain that it is okay to do this, that like we're progressing appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's often not talked about enough is your mental state, how that emotional state plays a role in your response because it's generating, a plethora of different neurotransmitters based on your emotions, and that can either help you or make it worse. So I think that's a pretty sound thing to think about. Um, you know, Based on what we're talking about, it kind of lends to this other idea. Like if a consumer, a general person, the population watches some of the exercises that you and I have clients do, and maybe they're exercisers themselves, they might think that they're a little weird or strange, combining certain joint systems in the way that we do. I guess, like for example, doing like a wrist extension with a shoulder movement and loading both, or adding an ankle movement with a knee and a hip and doing all different things at different joints. I wonder if you could outline like what is the thought process behind creating some of these non-traditional exercises so people can understand why we might do them and how they might help with whatever they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think with the knowledge that you and I have, it is looking at muscle and joint synergies, looking at kinematic synergies, looking head to toe. What does a body want to do, and how do we make that easier for it? And so, in a video that the volleyball player that I was working with, based on understanding her, how much she uses her wrist into this flexion, how tender her hand was, and the fact that I'd already worked all of her fingers in motion and everything was super strong locally. But, and everything in the shoulder was super strong and everything in the elbow was super strong. But when I tested them together, her pain went up. She felt weak. She felt vulnerable. She said it hurt her back. So like taking all of this data collectively and like, okay, what is going on here? I think that's where we're putting our complex systems thinking hats on. Like there's something else going on, and there is an inability for our system to strategize this progression together, this continuous task that it's trying to do.
Mm.
And with her, and that's the amazing thing about systematizing, or just creating paths for the brain to understand how to connect pieces of the puzzle to where if it is perturbed, like it is just like on fire, or meaning in a good way, like it
Yeah.
is solid as a rock. And so that's where I started testing that. Like, how does that feel to you? Does that feel good? That feels really good to me. That feels strong. She's like, oh my God, my back's not hurting now. It's like, I didn't plan on that, but that's kind of what we see, right? Okay, cool. Let's keep going. And we're just like marking on our whiteboard, like something to this. I don't know what it is. It's the way that your whole system doesn't want to do this thing together. And then even, she said like when she does that, she just felt gross. It's like, what, that to me is kind of the wild thing. But when we reinforced it, gave her shoulder flexion, which we had worked trunk extension before that, like all of these other pieces were really strong. But when we did that and then we systematized it and came back, everything was strong as a rock.
So for people that don't know what systematizing is, can you just briefly explain that?
Yeah. Not to try to use a buzzword, but just connecting wrist flexion with shoulder flexion with elbow extension. It's just doing an isometric where she's just opposing force into one motion while she does another task, right?
Right.
While she does something else. And so the brain is thinking of how to connect that. We're just
Yeah.
making it easier for that.
Yeah,
And
that's
then,
sorry, go ahead.
no, go for it.
No, I was just gonna say that's like the big buzzword in the industry is integration, right? Everyone wants to integrate things, whatever that means in their minds. And then
Right.
the other camp, everybody wants to isolate things. And what you're saying is we got to do it all. Let's isolate the pieces, make sure they're solid. But then when we bring them together, what's happening? Is it working? Is it not? So it's kind of like this holistic viewpoint of covering all your bases.
Yeah, we're looking at every aspect of the body, and I think we understand that. All right, you have a theme where you're breaking down in isolation, and what are the integrated pieces, especially for whatever you want to do in life. If you're an athlete, she has a certain movement pathway. Let's reverse engineer all those pieces and check them, and then what isn't connecting, and then how do you feel? And so I think it's interoception, right? It's giving you an awareness of yourself, helping your brain understand where you are in any position in space, and then giving you agency for control.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up volleyball because I had a volleyball client too, who I worked with for a long time. And it wasn't, we made marginal changes. He was feeling better. But until we discovered and I started doing the systematizing thing with his wrist and his shoulder, we couldn't get more range. You couldn't really resolve the thing that was there. As soon as we brought in like wrist extension, shoulder flexion, and some of those things that you just mentioned with your volleyball player, finally picked up the last little bit of motion he was missing. Finally started feeling better. And what's even wilder is he worked on his toes, which he has really poor quality control over. Like they're almost spastic. And he was feeling working on his toes, his shoulder pain was starting to go away. It was the oddest thing you would never expect. So like this integrated system, you work on something that needs help and it starts to carry over in other places really far away. It couldn't be any further. The toes and his shoulders, like as far away as possible.
I think that's so cool. To me, that's just like, it excites me because I mean, we're just like, we're just kind of dipping our feet in the surface of understanding this, where like when we can run it, I think the way we do, where the sessions I'm having lately, where, it does matter where you start based on quality, based on range of motion, based on sensation. But at the same time, I feel like we can get there either way. We're just in real time testing and collecting data. And so when you look at a human being at this way, we're just engineering them to work better. So I tell my people in here, like, I'm just reprogramming, recalibrating, recalculating where you're at to give you access so you can do more in real time. How's that feel to you? Wow, that feels incredible. And if it doesn't, you can tell right away. So then we can just change, and so everything we do influences everything else.
Yeah, that's kind of a lens to the next thing I wanted to just touch base on, which was this idea of the eyes and the ocular motor system and how that plays a role in our movement. Like what types of issues have you seen come up when people's visual system is not operating appropriately?
Yeah. So, well, a thought that I have is just understanding how much tension the eyes control into the body and how that is, this idea of, and I don't even know how to say it in a different word, this temporal spatial awareness, your awareness of yourself in space, your brain's awareness of where you are, where all the data in our cells, these mechanoreceptors, these sensory organs, and how they turn over are all equating where we are with movement all the time in real time, and understanding that because we're made of all these inhibitory feedback loops, that where is it constantly changing, and what's one of our brain's system, whatever biggest strategies to protect us is, I think, by controlling the eyes, and when I really started getting into this, I had clients that head to toe couldn't go in a certain direction. It's like we would work this theme and they would have decent results, like, wow, everything is like really high quality, but they wouldn't necessarily feel better, or they wouldn't be able to progress some of these positions mechanically, some of these movements with weight or force. Like they could have some adaptations, but like, I don't know, man, I'm still dealing with this same feedback, sensation, pain, whatever it is. I can't seem to break this plateau. But when I started playing with the eyes and giving people movements and progressions for them to work with, I started seeing that everything was holding. And like, for instance, I worked on a guy who's like world champion jiu-jitsu. He's a massive dude. He works with a lot of different people. I mean, this dude is like the dude in jiu-jitsu. And when I first saw him rolling on the mat, I noticed that he did not want to bring his left side back at all. Whatever he did was go to the right. He just went to the right every movement. And it's almost like it reminded me of like Zoolander. You know what I mean? Like he didn't want to go in a certain direction. And you could just see it. I was like, do y'all see his like posture? Is that just how he rolls? He's a huge dude. Well, he got up on my table and I just was like, I'm going to test this. And this is a video that I had. I'm just going to test this. This is the first time I ever worked with him. I just want to see what's going on. So I had him close his eyes, look left, open his eyes, look left, had him look down, look in all these different directions. Everything went low quality when his eyes went to the left. So I was perplexed. He didn't want to rotate his spine to the left. His pelvis and his spine were both trying to fix him in this kind of right fixed rotation this way. So he was kind of like right rotated, left side elevated, head was cocked here to try to give him some idea of going in this direction, I guess. Even the way his feet were. And we just reinforced shoulder abduction with his eyes going left. Gave him some exercises and essentially just did isometrics. And then I had him just do some things with his diaphragm. His arm wouldn't flex, right? Like it was going here. It went all the way back. His spine went left. He rotated even further than he did to the right side just by doing that. And I just think that is such a powerful, not only tool that we have, but ability into the system. And it's just, I think, again, it's just thinking deeper. And so his homework, do these exercises with your eyes, do some isometrics to the left. Everything is left, think left. And I worked with him, 5 or 6 times and it didn't show up again.
And those changes probably happened immediately the first time he did them, right?
It was right away. Like we could have worked on him on the table and loaded his system and probably got some opening, but I mean, it was freaky. I mean, he's here and then his arm is all the way in flexion. He could extend, he could turn his head all the way. Like he couldn't even turn his head to the left. Everything was going to the left.
So what kind of examples of exercises would come up in this client's situation?
So what I had him do first is I had him start with what I felt like he needed on that side. Like he needed to anchor himself kind of in the sagittal plane and extension. So I had him sit him on a table, breathe into the diaphragm, hold up to the left. I had him do that 5 or 6 times, and then we loaded it with weight. Had him do that. Then I had him just do some rows where he's rowing and turning his head to the left and giving him, an idea of like, this is where we want to be. Then let's do that and close your eyes and go to the left. And then I had him go into shoulder flexion. And as he did, head up, head up, eyes left, just kind of doing all this stuff. And yeah. And then I just, with his eyes in general, just had him, I want you just to sit there and look to the left. And I want you to look up. And then I want you to look down. And then I want you to look to the left. And I just started giving him an ability to go into that. And that was kind of his homework, and it seemed to help.
Yeah, so it's basically training his visual system, his brain, to get more assimilated to looking left and getting back to some degree of symmetry. Was it hard for him to do the left looking thing, or did it like mess things up? Or
I mean, I noticed like so it was after that, the first session he came in to see me, like everything had opened up, but we still had to kind of reconnect some pathways with his eyes going that way, but it just seemed to hold.
Nice.
I don't know, and I don't know if that's going to happen with everyone, but
yeah.
And is that a concussion or is there something else going on?
Right. I mean, that was my next question, is what are the causes for disrupting this in the first place?
So, I mean, I can tell you from experience with, I had a wine rack fall on my head last year. Yeah, unfortunately. And I had 3 bottles of champagne from about 25 feet up fall and like land on my head to the right, and back. I mean, it was really bad. Like it hit my shoulder to the point where it has some degree of separation that I've been working with. And in getting work on myself, I've noticed that there's a interesting thing where I don't want to go to the right. And it just seemed like it cascaded down into my system. And so working with that and getting work done and, getting the ability to do that again, my sensations went down a ton. So it's like, what is that? Right. And there's obviously some sort of protection.
Yeah. Some head trauma that's shaking something loose.
keeping you from going places you don't have any business going in until it's covered.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're always trying to survive. So if we have something traumatic happen that potentially your body sees as a threat to its existence, that might alter its function until you give the right signals. Um, this is a good segue into the idea of symmetry because ultimately that's what we're talking about is like, well, we're not symmetrical right now because we can only go one direction. And
Yeah.
obviously, symmetry can cover bases from the visual system, vestibular system, auditory, skeletal, muscular. Obviously, as you mentioned, we do have some degree of symmetry with organs, but of course, our heart's a little more to the left, our liver's to the right. So that's not always going to be that like perfectly symmetrical. But from a standpoint of like the skeletal, muscular, neurological system, why do you think it's important that we're symmetrical and what happens when we grow more and more asymmetrical from those points of
Well,
view?
I think that, as somebody who was an athlete who played baseball and golf for so long, these are pretty asymmetrical things. And even when I played football, like I was hitting with one side of my body, I was pivoting usually with one side, I was laterally shifting. I could do both, but like there was a dominant movement pattern that I had. And those limitations carried over. And when that is something I've had to work with, I don't operate as well when I have those imbalances because you literally think about it like shoes wearing out on one side versus the other. You're getting play in a certain area of your body that you're not evenly. And if it's not evenly distributed, not only do you lose, I think, potential access to positions over time. By the way, our cells turn over and information, but you you form peptides and bonds to rely on certain areas. So it's like your rate of force gets lower in certain areas, gets higher in others, which causes a type of imbalance or compensation. Your ability to resist fatigue in certain positions, which is, I think, symmetry is this idea of longevity. You can use energy systems evenly. Your brain can strategize on demand and put you in any position or plane of motion or configuration. You're going to operate really well. I think it's a direct reflection of your nervous system's health. And I think also, there's a lot of talk about posture. And what I think it is, if it's the position that you move from and you have muscles that are, there is always some level of control posture, but what muscles are shortened? What muscles are we relying on? They're contracting. What muscles aren't? It's like that uneven distribution is a direct sign over time of how well you're going to do. And then even on top of symmetry, like what are these adhesions in our tissue and why do they show up to give us some sort of extra support? Which then on a deeper level, it's like what all of this is affecting neurotransmitters, how we show up. We are meant to be these stacked individuals. And our circumstantial use is we don't want to necessarily take away our ability to rely on our strong points, but we want to have pretty even distribution so we last a long time and feel good while we're doing it. I think we feel the best when we're symmetrical.
Yeah, that touched on some things that you don't hear about often. Everything in symmetry is typically postural, and that's fine, but that's such a small component because like we don't stay still very much at all. Posture is changing depending on the demands and the situation. What I never hear about is very very rarely hear about is symmetry within what you said: strength, force output, endurance. And you mentioned, energy systems. Not everyone knows what that means. Can you kind of outline what energy systems means and like give examples of which kinds there might be?
Well, yeah. So if I think about our aerobic capacity, that is essentially also involved in buffering certain things that are in our blood. This is involved in our muscular system's ability to contract. It's like lactate or alactate thresholds. This is all, I think the reason so let me see the best way to think about this. The reason that we want to train in certain capacities, certain areas for volume, certain areas for strength, certain areas aerobically, is to stimulate how we use different macronutrients, right? So, glycogen, right? How do we use sugar for fuel? How do we use fat for fuel? How do we make sure that the muscle is getting nutrients and getting blood flow in? When I think about energy systems, to use mitochondria, right, by way of ATP and all this kind of system that we have. It is, I guess, being anti-fragile is kind of the way that I look at it. So when I think energy systems, how quickly do we wear out to then compensate and put us in different positions?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like just being this person who can do a variety of things, lift heavy things, run long distances, whatever it might be. Obviously, you tailor the type of stimulus or progressions based on their desired goal. But also, we have to, as professionals and most people, want health, long term health span, longevity, which then means we probably need to be decent at all these things because in life, we are called upon to do a variety of those things. I guess I'm wondering, as an example, maybe two examples. One, of a client where you might be targeting the endurance aerobic side of the energy system versus maybe a client who has a deficit in the output side. How do those differ? Like, what's it look like?
So, I mean, anytime I test, like if I'm doing something that's exerting them through endurance, like a VO2 max test, which I haven't done in a while, or even through exercise, going for a certain amount of repetitions, um, minute to minute and comparing the pathways of where they break down, I think that we tend to recover the best when we have high aerobic endurance capacity. We tend, and thinking about the fibers that we use there, the different types of muscle fibers that we have. When I'm thinking about output physically, I'm thinking about them working in and out of positions and seeing where the movement pattern or progression might break. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think from a standpoint, aerobically, you're talking about taking them through a longer excursion and maybe that how that lends to recovery because of their ability to produce specific compounds in their bloodstream that might lend to that ability
Yeah,
to.
or just let's just say like somebody using that stand up erg skier.
Yeah,
Like I've had people do that. We're like, we're going to go for 1 minute to the max. That's a different type of
yeah.
muscular endurance right there versus doing some zone two training for an hour and a half with like a
Hmm.
vest on, versus slow and controlled with good form doing a bicep curl for a minute with a certain weight at a certain effort.
Yeah, that's funny because you're just kind of touching base on something that is not really well talked about or understood, I guess, in the general fitness industry. Is that everyone talks about you're either in aerobic or you're anaerobic, like they don't cross over, but in reality, you're always in and out of both throughout any excursion. You're never just one or the other. And so, like every one of those things you mentioned are probably tapping into both of them, but which one is more emphasized? Like the skier thing, all out, people would say that's anaerobic, but it's got minutes, so you're probably a little bit aerobic too. Bicep curl, kind of a little bit of both, also, right? Versus zone two, pretty much aerobic more so than anything. It's interesting. Everyone always wants to be like black or white, this or that. It's like, it's not really how the body works. It's always a crossover.
Yeah, I
Do
agree. I think it's the more that I've learned about this, like I took the certification last year and I'm still learning, but um understanding how to condition the system to tolerate more stress. It's not just through weightlifting. It's having the back end taken care of as well. So how much blood flow do you get in certain areas? How long can you last, in certain positions, and understanding these different zones, they contribute to us using kind of what we alluded to earlier, these energy systems differently, which is all just your threshold to tolerate all stress and
Yeah,
force into the system. When you have a very high threshold, when your nervous system is working and when your body is in a good position, I think everything else, like that's where we are at our optimal. We can function at a high level. We can thrive. We can do what we're meant to do while we're here. And I think, not everything is meant to be like I have to feel good all the time, but I do relate to I at least want sensation wise to feel good in my body.
Yeah, me too. That's why I'm in this field. Well, that and obviously to help people do the same. But right before we jumped on here, you brought up a question for me, and you brought up this idea of range training and this maybe popular thing that's resurfacing. Without me explaining it, how about you jump in and kind of tell the audience what you've been seeing and what range training is, and then we can just kind of go from there.
Well, I think without knowing it, people understand what their active range of motion is. It's like, hey, I can't get further than this position. So why don't I potentially shove myself where I can go further and then start working out of it? And what I don't think that certain people, especially even some clients I've worked with that have done this, is that they understand how quickly the body inhibits based on demand. And that you might be down regulating one thing to build up another. And so I think there's this idea, I've heard people say, well, range train, you're gaining all this range, but we have structural capacity for this. And I think where you and I come in to range, always understanding that, yeah, we should train through an available range of motion that we have, work in and out, and we can get progressively stronger, either with heavier loads or overstimulating these positions. And then you feel better and operate better because it's like we said earlier, everything influences everything else. Where I think there's just, some well-intended people, but maybe misinformation right now, where if you are statically shoving yourself into positions, great, look at me, now I can move here, but now I have zero control. And if I'm not loading myself in a super heavy way or slamming somebody with football pads, I might be like, oh, this feels okay. But what is going to happen? That tension doesn't go to the ether. That tension goes to other areas to try to down regulate. So if I was,
So, can you explain that a little bit? You said you're inhibiting one thing and potentially upregulating another. Can you be a little more concise or give an example of like some tissues or a position and what might be happening?
think about shoving we talked about joint capsule earlier. Think about if your shoulder is flexed and you're on a wall and you're just taking it back as far as you can, going to
Overhead.
the wall. Yeah. And then from there, I mean, I've got no control, and then shoving your arm back in the wall and holding that. What muscles did you potentially inhibit? Right. And how do you know?
Yeah, you wouldn't really, I mean, you can take a guess. You won't know how the system's going to respond until you look. Could be a variety of 30 things. Who
Yeah, and
knows?
so if you don't know, and I think a lot of these exercises aren't tailored to the person. Like they're not, you know what I mean? They're not, there's no prerequisite understanding of where you currently are. What are your current capabilities? Have you done a thorough assessment, understanding the dynamics of how your body works together and all of these systems we're talking about, which is something I've been working with is called the physics of you. Like really what makes you thrive, what breaks you down. That's what I call it. This is the physics of you. This is your data. This is who you are when you're stressed. When you break down, this is where you go. This is your pattern of how your system relies on its own strength. You're always going to revert back to positions of strength where your brain knows that it can protect you. You can procreate, you can hunt, you can fight, you can flee. You know what I mean? You can
Mhm.
operate at least for a short time. And I don't think that there is this thought process. And I think it's just looking at somebody that might have a certain amount of mobility or flexibility based on their structure,
Mhm.
potentially. And then they're doing these cool looking things, but what are you down regulating? What other pieces of this puzzle are you potentially sacrificing to gain this movement?
Yeah, to gain this extra 5 degrees of shoulder flexion or something. And you know what people always say, especially ones that haven't had a problem or an injury like we've had or aren't dealing with aches and pains that are chronic, they always say, well, it doesn't bother me yet, is what I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
It's like, you really, just because something doesn't hurt doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. And at some point, it might, as you're saying too, the back specific shoulder motion, you take it that far consistently over time under stress and forcefully, you might actually end up growing bone or bone spurs or end up tearing something. And it takes hundreds and thousands of repetitions of that before it might happen. But why even do that? For what?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can get some cool things out of certain certain inputs. It's like this idea of Davis or Wolff's law, tissues remodeling based on demands. Um, but like you said, do you understand what that is? What that is? And it's like you're good until you're not.
Mm.
I
And when
think,
you're not, it sucks.
and when you're not, it sucks. And yeah, I have several friends who have never had an injury, never, they didn't put their body to the test like you or I may have, and so it's like it's all good. But the way that I see them train, it's like it's just a recipe for for like what's coming. Okay.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very real thing that I hope people hear. I mean, this, I guess, just changing directions a little bit. We deal with a lot of people who have pain or aches, things, sensations they don't like. What is your approach or perspective on when someone has pain somewhere? Maybe not necessarily the cause, but maybe if you want to touch on the cause, but like, how do you think about pain in the body, and how do you view exercise as a
Like if
potential?
somebody just comes in to see me.
Yeah,
Yes.
like, I got this shoulder and thing and this knee thing, and it's just always hurting. Not to the level where I need to have surgery or anything of that nature. Like, it's someone who it would be useful to exercise, but I just wonder what your framework is in your mind when something
Yeah, I think pain is there to get our attention. I think it's clearly that something is going on, and not necessarily like an overuse thing, but it's a misuse. Right? There is some sort of misuse happening that we can't seem to figure out. And I mean, I completely listen and understand people's pain points, but I want to see how all these other pieces are contributing. Okay, if you're coming into with a certain type of shoulder pain, we're going to look locally at your shoulder, but what is the neck doing? What is your spine and thorax doing? Where are your hips? What can you do? What can't you do? What are these asymmetries that we're talking about? Looking at your posture, where do you sit naturally? What are the demands you're placing on your body? What are your goals? And then, like, in three planes of motion, where do you break down when we test it? Right. And then with your diaphragm, like, how are you breathing to regulate all of this? And are you recovering? And, there's a gambit of things that I look into. It's like Inception when we start like going deeper and deeper. But I just see pain as, it really is a check engine light that something materially, biochemically is going on. In that we have such a tool by using the neuromuscular system, by understanding how to increase input into the body, to downregulate, to give you access so you can then challenge it and get these tissues force tolerant and bring about symmetry and make your system as robust as it can be. You're gonna have the best chance of getting out of pain.
Yeah, that's well said. What is your take on, you just mentioned force tolerance. So maybe explaining that real briefly, and then how that ties into this exercise dose response thing.
Well, so when I say force tolerance, there's different ways that we can measure it, but specifically with my hands, like, what positions can I put you in that you can't control? Right. And you can tell the prerequisites of those motions. So it's like if I'm testing somebody's internal rotation of their hip and they're bringing it in and they're going really weak, and I'm testing certain things in knee flexion and they're going really weak, it's like it's telling me a certain story. These are positions that you just don't have access to just control force against me, which again is that stability piece. Versus, you have felt people where you're like, oh my God, that's strong as a rock when you put them in these positions. When you challenge people in certain positions with exercise, where do they break down? Where can they control it? And I'm not even talking about moment arms or anything where it drops off. I'm just talking about in general. What positions can we put people in where they can handle it? And it's like those are the reads I get. Where does somebody have an issue and like your whole body doesn't want to do this frontal plane thing? You know what I mean? It's just like too much for some reason. Then we start looking at that and then looking elsewhere. Or you don't want to head to toe rotate in a certain direction or whatever it is. You have zero ability to sagittally move in your spine on one side, but when we put you on the other side, we test everything is super strong. It's like
Hmm.
that is all telling me something about threshold for stress, because force and stress are one and the same. It's all cumulative. Your brain is like, dude, something's not right. We don't like this position. I think it's up to us to figure out what that is based on the theme of what we're seeing.
Right. That's the force tolerance side of things. But then in retrospect of thinking of exercise dose response and how, I guess, how that relates to force tolerance.
Yeah, like what can you tolerate and what can we build upon? And I think it's like a systematic stimulus dosed properly that we know that your system seems to like and tolerate. And we have abilities to fatigue somebody and stress them, which what I do is I go through certain things. Let's go back to the table. What held, what didn't, and why. And then, that dose response is also, again, kind of the cognitive piece. Like I've given people certain progressions and it's like, dude, I don't even know what happened. I can't think. Like I don't even have an ability to do that now. Now I feel super fatigued and tired mentally as well as
Yeah.
physically. I think that's kind of what we're looking at with this dose response. But how do we physiologically give you just enough that you can build upon?
Yeah, doing what you can and how something you can recover from to move forward from there. Like I had a client, like I mentioned, with ocular motor issue, looking left was a big problem, still kind of is. When we started, she couldn't handle much of any force, like the same amount of weight. She's in her 40s, same weight that a 90-year-old might do. It was causing problems. And it took many, many months to get to the point where she could do like a decent, appropriate weight you would need to do to get a normal response from an exercise. So, like if you're struggling out there, and you think you need to be doing more, that might not be the solution. You really have to probably dial things back to go from a place where you can actually adapt and get better. Sometimes it's way, way less than you might think.
That's hard medicine for people to take sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially for people like us who, play football, like men especially, guys, like we just think that we're bulletproof, and the reality is we're not, especially as we're getting older. Kids, stress, finances, like it's a lot,
Absolutely.
Um, I'm curious, is there anything new or interesting that you're exploring at this time?
Man, I've just been going so deep on the body and the levels. And I think for not even necessarily new, but it's just the connection of the physical into the mental, into the spiritual, exciting to life, this like essence of who we are. I've been going so deep on just empowerment, helping through the body to give people access to a higher level. And then from there, like, how do they have an impact in their lives? It's like bringing control to you on all these pathways. And like, you know, multiple clients like text me after sessions, like, dude, I can't believe how good I feel on every
Mm,
level. So that to me is like just connecting all of this into our potential. Like, what is your potential? Like, Eric's potential is here, right, on any given day, but how are you tolerating stress? Where's your body? Where's your mind? What are all these things? How do we give you access your potential so you
yeah,
can do and be who you're meant to be? And then I think besides that, fatherhood. Like,
yeah,
yeah, man, just I'm going deep on it. And it's just like every day I see my son, I am just more excited and more in love and more checked in and anchored to kick serious ass and not play small or not not dim my light, you know, or maybe just certain things where in the past I might not want to take that opportunity in Mexico to speak in front of a large audience because it's like,
yeah,
oh, I don't know, I haven't really done that. So like taking that, like, I'm doing it. Life is short, and I think there are no limits. And so when I look at him, I'm like, dude, I want to build the life that I know that you deserve, that I deserve, that we're all wanting.
yeah, yeah. You're bringing up like a real holistic and a real true integration of the whole system, which is mind for sure. It's huge. And then for those who believe in the spiritual side of things, as myself, I do. Very important. I have an interesting question for you. If you could go back in time, I would say 10 years, and talk to yourself and give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself?
That's such a loaded question because, like, would I change anything? Because I think the struggles I've had, have shaped me into who I am. And I might not have the people in my life and the events and the experience to play and lean into, but I would just tell myself to enjoy it. Don't play
Hmm.
small. Like, get after it. You are on the level with everybody else. There's nobody above you. Have faith, you know, put your priorities in the right spot. And I think, I've always been this like lifelong learner who is just like tapped into want to help, with like zero malicious intent. But so it's like, just be you, just shine, man. And I probably would have tried to get into all this stuff earlier. Like
Mhm.
dive into these things. If I knew what I know now 10 years ago, it's like, holy shit.
Dude, that's such good advice. We all could use a little more joy in our lives, and sometimes you have to come in with the intention to give yourself space to find it or feel it. We're always on the go, 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 and forget to just like, you know, enjoy what's right in front of you.
Yeah,
um,
be okay saying no at certain times. And like,
yeah,
it's like not saying cut people out of your life, but there are certain people that I had in my life at that time where it's like, you know, d- I don't suffer fools any longer.
what I think we're about to wrap up. I'm just wondering if you have any last things you might want to say.
Man, I just think the world that we're living in right now, it's an interesting time. I think we're being inundated with a lot, and there's a lot of nonsense out there, but I think it's like collectively time for all of us to do big things, to not play small, to enjoy the ride and just have a good time doing it. I think that's where it is for me. And it's like I'm reading a book that I've reread a million times right now, Think and Grow Rich. And it's just like be decisive and do your thing.
Mhm.
Like wherever you want, I think it is time. So yeah, man, I feel honored to be here. I appreciate you. What about you? Anything that you are reflecting on right now? Is there anything that you want to share? What's showing up for you?
Yeah, man, I agree. It's an insane time. Wars all over all over the world. You know, the economy, the way it is, it's scary. Like things could just break at any moment. So I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I'm just like, be informed. Don't let it overtake your life. Try to be in the moment. Enjoy what you have, and take advantage of the opportunities you have. Take care of yourself. Listen to your body, and do the best you can. Like don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself love and space.
Oh yeah, man.
Well, dude, I really appreciate you coming on and talking, and you really touched on a lot of amazing things in this discussion. So maybe we can do another one in the near future.
I'd love to, dude. Yeah, I really appreciate it, Eric.
All right. Well, thank you again, and then well, hopefully we'll be on in a few months. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thanks.